me ask you this. Do you think it's important for a hospital, if it has policies, to make sure that its nurses and its employees know that the policies exist, train them to make sure that they know what the policies mean, and that they follow up and make sure that they have the policies?
Yes, sir.
Okay, do you know if that was ever done in this case?
I don't have any information about their training schedules or ongoing training or policy revisions or that type of.
You don't have any information one way or another what policies any of the nurses in this case received or didn't receive, correct?
Correct. I don't have that educational information about, their training or annual requirements, things like that. I don't have.
Did you read the deposition for Sandy Gill, the hospital's corporate designee?
I did not.
So you don't know that Sandy Gill has testified in this courtroom that the hospital doesn't know what policies or procedures that the nursing staff receive, right?
That's accurate.
So when you testified under oath just a moment ago that the way you receive policies and the way you were trained at other hospitals is just like this hospital, you said that under oath. You don't know if that's true or not, right?
That would be accurate. I don't have their educational folders. That would be accurate.
From the time that the MRI technician is aware of the order until the time that she is taken to the MRI tube, how much time elapsed? Do you know?
It's an hour and a half, an hour.
It's actually an hour, roughly an hour and 15 minutes. Okay? I want you to assume that. Any reason to dispute that?
No.
It's an hour and 16 minutes, but let's just say an hour and 15, okay?
Yes.
Here's what I would like to know. What extenuating circumstances prevented Jessie Adams from being in the MRI tube for an hour and 15 minutes?
There was a patient that had gone before that any number of things can happen, and it's kind of ironic and sad, but inevitably when you have the most best intentions of getting things done, things just seem to go awry. And that patient could have needed to be cleaned up, could have been intubated, you could have had to wait for transport, you could have had 100 other things go awry that needed to be addressed straight away before you could get the next patient down there. I mean, the number of possibilities are endless.
Okay, well, I'm standing in front of the jury and I'm making a list. So help me, of all the things that you just documented that are possibilities, you tell me what were the things that occurred, the things that prevented them from getting her into the MRI tube. I'd like to make a list, so tell me what they are.
The possibilities or the things that the record reflects?
What happened?
There's not anything that was documented about hurdles or obstacles or barriers. There wasn't anything documented, so it's subject to interpretation and speculation.
Well, is it fair for us, since we represent Jessie Adams, to rely on what's in the medical record?
It is.
Is it fair for us to rely upon what the hospital has told us happened?
Yes.
Is it fair for us to rely upon the testimony from the people that were there?
Yes.
I'll represent to you that Megan Duncan has testified under oath in this case, okay? Are you aware of that?
Yes.
I asked her the same question. I said there was an hour and 15 minutes. Can you explain why that delay occurred? Do you know what she said?
No.
She said, I can't. Can't explain it. Have you ever seen the schedule for the MRI tube on that particular day?
The entire schedule? No.
Well, have you seen what the hospital has provided us in this case?
Sir, the only schedule or portion of it were the two patients before and then Ms. Adams. That's the only information I have.
Austin, would you please pull up Plaintiffs Exhibit 60, interrogatory number 6. See if I can help you a little bit. This is in evidence, this is Exhibit 60. This is the sworn interrogatory that the hospital gave us in this case, and the jury's seen it 100 times. But I need to ask you a question about it, so I've got to put it up.
Okay.
You see Jessie Adams' MRI on there? There's actually two. There's one for the thoracic spine, and there's one for the lumbar spine.
Yes, sir.
That runs from 6:31 to 7:26. Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
And then if you look above that, there are two other MRIs. There's one from 3:35 to 4:08. There's one from 4:29 to 5:15. Do you see that?
Correct. Yes, I do.
Okay. So has the hospital provided this to you?
I believe it's an exhibit on one of the depositions, but I thought you were referring to like the entire day schedule, so.
Okay. When I was listening to the questions that you were answering from the hospital's lawyer, I wrote this down in real time when you said it. You said they got her into the MRI as soon as the MRI was available. You recall saying that?
Yes,
Okay. This shows that the MRI tube was available at 5:15, correct?
it shows that that's when that study was completed. But again, there are variables that could come into play where the tube is not, like, you can't have an available machine. You need the MRI tech there to run it. You need to make sure that the screening form has been completed. You need somebody to get the patient and bring them to you. And, excuse me, there's a ton of variables. And it looks, if you look at these times, it would appear that the first study, there's only 21 minutes between the first two listed here. And if that's the standard within that hospital to, have them pretty distinctly running back to back, then I would question you about if that's the exception and not the rule, what happened? Was there an extenuating circumstance? Because they typically, their practice and habit is to get them, done really expeditiously. But this one outlier would be cause for concern about some other extenuating circumstance.
Okay, so you make a really good point, which is, I think what you're saying is that the habit and custom of the hospital in terms of how they turn these MRI tubes is something that would be informative to you on how long it normally takes. Is that fair?
Correct.
And you've never looked at that, right?
Correct.
You can see here that it was 21 minutes for the MRI before Jessie. See that?
Yes.
Could you pull up Exhibit 15, please? You can see that Jessie's ended at 7:26. Let's see what time the MRI began right after her. Could you blow that up a little bit? The MRI right after Jessie starts at 7:48. See that?
Oh, they're backwards, right?
Yeah, these are the start times only.
Yeah, I see it.
Yeah. So that's 26 minutes. No, sorry, that's 23 minutes. 26, 20, that's, what was the last time? 26, that's 22 minutes, correct? So the MRI before her was 21, the MRI after her was 26, right? Okay, let's take a look. Can we look at the demonstrative? I'll represent to you. We can go back and look at these if you want. The jury's seen this. This is a summary of the times for the MRIs on that day. And while this is pulling up, I want to ask you a question. You testified that MRIs aren't used all that frequently in the emergency department at the hospitals that you were at, right?
Correct.
You can agree that they're used quite frequently at this hospital, right? You saw the schedule.
I don't know if those are all emergency room patients or if they're outpatient scheduled or inpatient scheduled.
For purposes of these questions, does it matter? Because isn't the issue how quickly they can turn the tube around?
It would seem as though they are frequently using the MRI machine on this day for various patients of unknown.
You made a statement before I showed you this, and the statement was, well, if you could show me the schedule, how frequently they were able to get people in and out, then if there's an outlier, it may cause some question about what happened with Jessie. Remember that?
Yes,
Is that precisely what this shows?
that Jessie was the outlier, yes.
Did you ask whether or not they have such a policy?
Did I ask them? I believe we spoke about it just on the periphery, in that it is in existence, but I haven't seen it.
Could you please pull up Plaintiff's Exhibit 33? Would you highlight the part for emergency patient? Nurse Hepler, I'll represent to you that there was a scheduling policy at this hospital that required all surgical patients who were classified as Class 2 emergency patients, that is involving life or limb threat, to be done within 1 hour. Are you aware of that?
No.
You would agree with me that from the time that she received the diagnosis from the MRI at 7:30 until the time that she got into surgery was about 2.5 hours, right?
By the time surgery started, yes, sir, that's correct.
You would agree with me that if they didn't get her into surgery within this policy, they breached this policy, right?
Your Honor, she hasn't even reviewed the policy. He is accepting one excerpt from this surgical scheduling policy for this nurse expert witness.
Your Honor, I'm for the very purpose of demonstrating what they haven't given her and what she hasn't considered and rendered her opinions. That is why I'm here. It goes to bias, it goes to credibility. Overruled. I want to make sure the jury heard your answer. They didn't get her to surgery within an hour, did they?
They did not.
That would be a breach of this policy.
As it is written, and again, there are extenuating circumstances, I know there's a good documentation of events that happened after they got the MRI report. But again, I can't speak to the OR service or how expeditiously they are able to move to be in compliance with their own policy.
Related to the schedule of the MRI tube before Jessie asked. You recall the question?
Yeah, it was 2 patients in a row that took an hour and a half to get from order to imaging setting.
It looks to me like one of them started at 3:35, and one of them started at 4:29. Is that what he was showing you? I was having a hard time seeing it. Were those the 2 that he showed you?
Yes.
Okay, and the idea behind that was, well, maybe it takes longer than the slides or the patients that I showed you earlier. I think you agreed with that, right?
I believe the statement was that patients are into the ER inevitably take longer because their paperwork's not ready, their screening forms aren't done. So the patients who are scheduled, whether they're inpatient or outpatient, already have the screening forms, they've already been cleared for it, they're scheduled and good to go.
If I'm reading this correctly, it looks like the MRI spine lumbar without contrast started at 3:35. See that?
Yes, sir.
And then there were 134 images shot. Right?
I don't see that information, I don't know.
Look out to the right, there's the image count.
Oh, I can't see it, your window's in the way, sorry.
And then there's an MRI brain contrast that starts at 4:29 p.m. See that?
Yes,
That's less than an hour later, right?
right, with 556 images.
That means they shot the MRI, they got the patient out of the tube, they consented the other patient, they did all the paperwork, they moved all the coils around, they cleaned it, and they got another patient in there by 4:29, right?
Yes,
And I showed you the other ones that showed between 20 and 26 minutes, patients are being moved in and out of the MRI tube, correct?
yes,
So the question isn't really, when did this person's MRI start? We'd have to know to some extent when the order was entered for the start time, how long they'd been waiting. But we know in Jessie Adams' case how long she waited. She waited an hour and 15 minutes. And if the excuse is MRIs are a dangerous business, there's all these forms you have to fill out, you got to clean the MRI, I've got to walk back and forth with people, I got to get them on stretchers. What we do know is that it can be done, and it can be done in less than 30 minutes. Correct?
Yes.
It can be done in under 30 minutes at this hospital on this day with this machine in this emergency department with this MRI technologist, right?
Correct. I don't know what other staffing may have been available with it, if they had like an assistant or something that maybe did some of the cleaning and preparation for them, or housekeeping available. I can't speak to whether more tasks become the responsibility of the MRI tech after 5 o'clock.
It took 2.5 hours to get this MRI. You heard the lawyer for the hospital say that he doesn't disagree that that's apparently how long it took. Have you ever testified that in your experience about an hour and a half is how long it should take to get an MRI done?
I haven't ever testified about how long it should take to have an MRI done. They get done when the machine is available, the tech is available, the forms are complete, and the patient is ready.
You didn't testify that getting an MRI completed within an hour and a half of a stat order is reasonable in situations where there are other factors that prevent it from being done sooner.
I'm sorry, are you asking me if I did or did not say that?
Did you say that in your deposition?
I did say that.
Okay. Your testimony in your deposition was, in your experience, an hour and a half, unless it can be done sooner, right?
Yes.
Here we're talking about explaining away the fact that it took 2.5 hours. And you've heard explanations about, here are all the possible things that it could have been. And you're not an MRI technology expert, I know, but you're asked to assume all sorts of things from Ms. Tucker, who testified in here, right? The lawyer told you that, correct?
Yes.
The jury heard the testimony. You've seen the evidence. You've seen the evidence that it took longer than an hour and a half. It took 2.5 hours. And you still say there's no delay, right?
Again, MRIs get done when the is ready, the machine is available, the tech is ready. You know, we try to do it as expeditiously as possible and try to, you know, of course, move things as quickly as we can. But sometimes it's just impossible to get it done within 20 minutes.
So I have to ask the question. If the hospital's correct, and Dr. Tolhurst is correct, that in the instance where there are patients who are scheduled to have surgery, that they are going to get emergency patients in to the operating room within an hour in that circumstance, right? Let's assume that's what this policy means. Why in the heck would it be any different for somebody like Jessie Adams that's in the emergency room where there's no one scheduled? Can you explain that to the jury? How that makes any sense?
I cannot explain the policy.
What I just said doesn't make any sense, does it?
It seems like the policy is a little bit overzealous, constrictive. It seems like it would be hard to meet that 1 hour time frame each and every time.
Be hard to meet the time frame if the employees of the hospital don't even know about it, wouldn't it?
Well, yes, of course.
You didn't know about it, right?
Correct.
I'll be honest with you, I don't know one way or another whether there was or wasn't a patient on the table in the emergency room, but I'm going to assume for purposes of this case that when the hospital said that there was somebody in the MRI tube until 5:15, that we can take their word for that. Are you under the same impression?
Yeah.
Okay. So from 5:15 on until Jessie Adams gets into that tube, it's reasonable for the jury, strike that, from 5:15 until Jessie Adams gets into the tube at 6:31, it's reasonable for us to assume that the MRI technologist had the ability to get her in the tube, right? You haven't seen anything to the contrary.
There's no evidence to the contrary. Correct.
Incidentally, if there was an emergency patient in the tube at 5:15, like the hospital says, and that patient had to be taken back to the emergency room after the MRI scan, we know where Jessie Adams was, right? She was in the emergency department.
Using her.
Right. So it wouldn't take any time to walk over and say, Miss Adams, I've already reviewed the stat order. I know that you need an MRI. Take her up to the MRI machine. Right?
That's a scenario that could have happened, yes.
If the nurse is doing her job and she's charting her pain medication to make sure that she's comfortable so she can get an imaging study, she could have made sure she was medicated before she got in the MRI tube. Right?
If the pain was reported and the nurse was aware, yes, it could have been done in advance.
And we don't know, do we? Because there's nothing charted in the record. Right?
That is accurate.
We don't know what her pain was. Right?
That is accurate.
That could save time, right?
It could, yes.
Especially if you're at a hospital where the MRI technologist is running around doing MRIs. Apparently it takes a long time to get the patients in and out. Right?
Yes.
You got a patient that's emergent that needs an MRI stat, and if she needs pain medication, the nurse has the discretion, clinical discretion, to do something to make sure that her pain is taken care of so she can quickly and expeditiously get in the MRI tube. Right?
Yes, to advocate for the patient, yes.
Here's my last question about advocacy. You testified under oath that it would have been unreasonable for the nurse to pick up the phone and call the MRI technologist because it would delay her treatment further. Do you recall that?
I don't recall using the word unreasonable.
I thought you said that it wasn't necessary or it wasn't standard of care because all it would have done was delay her treatment further to call the MRI technologist.
In my experience, trying to get the MRI technologist on the phone results in a delay, whether it's 5 minutes or what have you. But it distracts them from their tasks at hand. They get, distracted or maybe a little irritated, and they're moving as fast as they can. So you've just taken them off of moving forward as expeditiously as possible. So it's not super productive in my experience.
You care about your patients that you treat when you're treating in the ER, right?
Yes, of course.
You're an advocate for them.
Absolutely.
In your experience, it takes about an hour and a half to get an MRI, right?
It varies. It could take, 6 hours sometimes to get an MRI, just depending on what equipment is available, what personnel we have.
Okay. Under the scenario where ordinarily it takes about an hour and a half, the patient's in an emergent condition, and you know every second counts, and you're sitting there looking at this patient who's been sitting there waiting for an MRI. At some point, you're going to pick up the phone and say, what is happening, right?
That is a scenario that could happen, yes.
Well, that's your job, right? Your job is to be a patient advocate. You don't deny that, right?
Correct.
Okay. So at some point, you do pick up the phone.
That would be accurate. At some point, you have your tipping point and it's been however long, if MRI is busy or other things are going on, it would be the nurse's discretion on when that time came.
Right.
That
Nurse's
we
discretion. And the discretion is based upon the severity the patient's need, whether there's a stat order, right? Lots of different things, right?
Correct.
But your testimony here is that it would have been unreasonable, or it would have delayed her care, I think you said, for her to pick up the phone and say, this patient's been here an hour and 15 minutes. She needs an MRI. Where are you? Right? That would have been unreasonable.
I never said unreasonable. It's counterproductive in some situations to distract them from what they're doing, to answer the phone to give you an answer that you would have known regardless.
5:15 to 6:31, what would she be distracted from?
There's no documentation of what she was doing.
Thank you. Pass the witness.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
All right, Judy, does the defense rest?
We do, Your Honor.
Plaintiff closed?
Plaintiff closes, Your Honor. May we approach briefly?
Plaintiff closed?
As do we.
Okay.